Not too many of the hunters were interested in plunging into thick woods in pitch darkness, knowing he was out there. Often I've tried to imagine how the creature must feel, since his very appearance and the sounds he makes frightened us. Our immediate reaction was to try to kill him. I suppose if a strange-looking creature from another world showed up, he'd get the same reception.
The legend of the Boggy Creek Monster, perhaps one of the most famous of the Sasquatch cryptids, has enthralled the citizens of Fauke, Arkansas since the 1900s, although the earliest sightings supposedly dated way back to 1834. They say that this hairy hominid stands between 7 and 8 feet tall on 2 feet, and it weighs close to 300 pounds. Its chest, legs, and arms are covered with thick, long hair. Some accounts describe the monster as running very fast with a galloping gait and swinging its arms in a fashion similar to a monkey. Some says it has a terrible odor, being described as a combination of skunk and wet dog, and also having red eyes about the size of silver dollars. Reports say that the monster was spotted more than 40 times in just 1997 alone. It had been suggested that the animal is nocturnal. A hunter reported seeing a sighting in broad daylight, though, in the Sulphur River Wildlife Area near Fauke in 2000. The Boggy Creek Monster has been the subject of 4 different films at least, beginning with 1973's famous The Legend of Boggy Creek. The movie centered around Bobby Ford's supposed encounter with the beast, and it played in drive-in theaters around the country and introduced millions to the legend. The famous encounter that the film is based on occurred back in 1971. Bobby and his wife, Elizabeth Ford, claimed that the monster attacked their home late on the night of May 1st. The monster, Elizabeth said, reached through a screen window, but was chased away by Bobby and Dan, his brother, who had just returned from a hunting trip. Not to be satisfied, the monster returned shortly after midnight and tossed Bobby to the ground. Bobby was then taken to the St. Michael Hospital in Texarkana and treated for large gashes across his back. He was suffering from mild shock when he arrived, according to newspaper reports. Several newspapers had been covering the legend around that time. Although no traces of blood were found at the Ford's home, 3-toed footprints were found near the house, and there were scratches on the porch and the siding, and a window were both damaged. When reporter Jim Powell got the call, he was the first to report it. Although most of the more famous sightings occurred back during the 1900s, and, of course, the Ford case in 1971, sightings have continued to the present day. But before we get into the present, let's take a look at some of the past run-ins with the Sulphur River Bottom's Big Hairy Man. It all began in 1908 in Fauke, Arkansas. One woman was reported to have seen a creature fitting the description of the Fauke monster when she was 10 years old. Jumping forward to 1932, a Jonesville man saw what seemed to be the same monster scratching around his porch before it vanished into the woods. One further sighting was reported to Fauke Sheriff's Office in 1946, describing as walking like a man, but not a man. Jumping forward to 1955, Fauke and Jonesville saw a cluster of new sightings, including 2 motorists who saw a hairy man-like creature flitting across the road near their home. Shortly after, the Victoria Advocate reported how one huntsman claimed to have gotten 15 shots off at a large ape-man close to nearby Boggy Creek, but apparently missed. The next bunch of sightings occurred in the mid-60s, largely among hunters. One typical description around the time had the creature at 7 foot tall, with reddish-brown hair about 4 inches long all over its body. It stood upright like a man, but had extra long arms. One particularly notable encounter from this time period was that of Carl Finch, the founder of the band Brave Combo, who saw a large hairy creature late one night while driving through the area with his cousin. What was an interesting personal anecdote only took on further significance after Finch saw The Legend of Boggy Creek several years later, and realized he had seen, now, the famous beast firsthand. In 1965, in Fauke, a teenage boy encountered a hairy man, or ape-like beast, near a lake on his family property. As the thing approached, he fired at it with a shotgun 3 times and then fled. This report came from one Smoky Crabtree, who we'll get into later. In 1969, in December, in Fauke as well, a family of 4 was driving on Highway 71 north of Fauke at night when they spotted what they thought was a man in a fur coat walking towards them on the opposite side of the road. It was cold and close to Christmas, so they decided to slow down and offer a ride. As they got closer, they realized it wasn't a man in a fur coat, but some kind of thing covered in hair. As they came upon it with the bright lights on, the thing stopped and raised its arm to shield the light from its eyes. The arm was thick, hairy, and muscular, according to the witnesses. Its body was covered in brown, shaggy hair with long hair over its face. The legs appeared to be, quote, caked in mud from the knees down. Scared, the family quickly sped off, wondering what they had just seen. Now, this location would have been close to the Ford property, and the date was prior to the public knowledge of the Fauke Monster sightings. Despite the many of early reports, it wasn't until the early 1970s that the beast lurking around the dark places of Fauke started to make national headlines. Although the sightings were intermittent and highly anecdotal, they were also very, very consistent. From the veterans and the sheriff's department, the stories of monsters were all too familiar, shrugged off as an amusing local legend. But whatever was out there in the swamps of Boggy Creek, it was about to break out and achieve international fame. Filmmaker Charles B. Pierce picked up the rights to Mr. Ford's story shortly thereafter his sighting, and turned to his sighting and many others, including the aforementioned Smoky Crabtrees. Smoky said of his segment, "The movie was a gross exaggeration of what had actually happened here in Fauke, and I, for one, would like to see the history kept straight." Smoky Crabtree was quoted as saying, the real monsters are the movie makers who came to Fauke. And with my unwitting help, got the townsfolk to reenact their encounters. They filmed all over the place, lied, cheated, and stole, got rich on the movie, and paid the townsfolk of Fauke in pocket change and broken promises. They were such weasels, according to Smoky, they even made the children of the local actors pay for their tickets to the premiere. Smoky personally recounts that he lost a fortune in cattle, lost wages, and timber he had to sell below market value. Damage from monster hunters and lawsuits trying to get the movie makers to pay what they owed. But to get back on track. Shortly after Bobby Ford's hospitalization in early May 1971, the previous trickle of monster sightings started to become a torrent. Route 71, a vast 1,500-mile-long highway that bisects the country north to south and passes through over 300 miles of Arkansas, would play a host to many of them. In mid-May, Mr. D. Woods, his wife Wilma Woods, and their friends were driving along the road near Boggy Creek when they saw something strange in the headlights. Running across the road in front of their well-respected local residence was a huge hairy ape-like creature with long arms and dark hair. Wilma Woods recounted the story to the Texarkana Daily News the next day. It was hunched over and running upright. It had long dark hair and looked real large. It was swinging its arms, kind of like a monkey does. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but there it was. My husband turned to me after it crossed the road and asked me if I saw it too. Shortly after, Fauke gas station owner Willie Smith made an unusual discovery in the soybean field that backed his property. A set of curious 3-toed animal prints, alarming in size, was leading away from his garage. These 3-toed prints were very similar to the ones found around the Ford property the previous month, indicating they may have had a common perpetrator. Smith's find became a local spectacle, with Fauke residents flocking to the field to see the prints. A group of them even saw the monster lurking in the bushes that edged the field, possibly observing the attention its tracks had caused in the local community. Game Warden Carl Galen was baffled by the casts, as they matched nothing he had ever seen before in the area. The prints even made their way to Dr. Frank Shambaugh, an archaeology professor at Southern Arkansas University, who somewhat dampened the fervor by suggesting they might be a hoax. If this was the case, then it would probably entail some degree of collusion between Smith and the Fords, as the prints found at the different properties appeared to have a common source. But whether the prints were genuine or not, the sightings kept coming. That summer alone, the monster made dozens of further appearances, almost as if it was auditioning for its forthcoming starring role in the legend of Boggy Creek. A red-eyed, hairy creature was spotted squatting near the woods adjacent to the homes of several Fauke residents. A child also reported seeing the same thing running into the woods a few nights later. Willie Smith's soybean field played host to more cameo appearances, with a woman and 2 men seeing a large 6-foot-tall hairy creature walking along the road near the field. One particularly notable sighting involves several campers at nearby Mercer Bayou. A family preparing their boat for a trip out onto the lake heard a piercing howl, followed by what they described as a large Sasquatch-like creature emerging from the woods. Panicked campers ran from their trailers to try and get a shot at the monster, but it fled before they could make a hit. Moving on to more recent sightings, in 1992, in October, in Fauke, 6 people, 5 young men in a car and 1 man in a semi-truck, traveling on FM 134 around 11 p.m., stopped their vehicles to watch a large hairy animal walk upright across the road. The creature was estimated to be 7 feet tall with a bulky frame covered in thick bushy hair. It was clearly silhouetted in the headlights as it crossed the pavement and walked into a field where it disappeared into the darkness. All 6 witnesses got out of the vehicles and discussed the amazing sighting before leaving the scene. In a sighting just from last year, 2019, in November, in Smackover, Arkansas, 65 miles from Fauke, a couple was driving south of Smackover and saw a tall, upright animal dart into the woods around 11 p.m. The creature looked as though it was about to run across the road when it saw the car and ran back into the woods. The couple described it as being very large, at least 6 to 7 feet tall, and definitely not human. Its eyes reflected in the headlights before it ran off with a swiftness that was way too quick for human. This location is approximately 65 miles east of Fauke, although still in the vast wooded areas of southern Arkansas. The location of the sighting was near a trash dump in a heavily forested and swampy area, with a creek running through it. In December of 2019, in Fauke, a young witness said she saw a monkey man in the woods while sitting in her father's truck along one of the rural roads at night. The location was near the Sulphur River, where many of the sightings of the alleged Fauke monster had been reported over the years. The whole Boggy Creek Monster ordeal turned into such a phenomenon that it spawned an annual Boggy Creek Festival that runs during October. The festival is set from October 23rd to 25th in Fauke. The festival and the Bigfoot Conference takes place at the Miller County Fairgrounds, where Bigfoot's top researchers will gather to discuss and share information about the legendary creature of the Boggy Creek bottoms. Boggy Creek also has its famous Monster Mart, where a set of tracks and eyewitness reports have gathered and been put on display. If this Boggy Creek creature was real, and it has remained decidedly elusive, even when a $1,000 bounty was placed on the monster by Little Rock radio station KAAY, the county's finest hunters wielding packs of hounds failed to find a trace of it. Despite of this, the reality of the monster had become firmly established in the community. Too many people had seen it to simply dismiss it as a figment of overactive imaginations. The sightings will continue to come in for several more years, though by the mid-70s they had decreased substantially in frequency. But they will never truly go away. At least once a year, somebody sees a large hairy creature lumbering along the edges of the woods or running down a dark highway at night. As recently as 2019, people are still seeing it, or perhaps the son or grandson of it. Though many movies and documentaries have been made on the Boggy Creek Monster, factual or fantasy, the citizens of Fauke and Texarkana certainly have an indelible legend on their hands, and one that still stalks the swamps and river bottoms, just waiting to be spotted again. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and stick around for Friday for another The Unknown Files here on Unknown Territory.